Hearing the news that bail was denied, Combs looked back at his three sons who were sitting about 3 rows behind him and patted his chest. When I asked his attorney what Combs said to him after that news, he said, quote, "I'll see you tomorrow." Why? Because they will be back in court tomorrow to fight that bail denial. This afternoon, though, Combs walked into court wearing a black T-shirt and gray sweatpants. He kept his focus mainly on the judge and at times looked at his attorney when he was speaking. The 54-year-old hip-hop mogul was charged with sex trafficking, racketeering, and interstate transportation for prostitution following a months-long Homeland Security investigation. Prosecutors allege that Combs used his business empire to force women to engage in sexual acts with professional sex workers at events he called.
To the courtroom, the disgraced music mogul, Diddy looked a little rough around the edges compared to how he usually has been looking in these court appearances.
A viral 4-part video once sent shockwaves through social media claiming that music mogul Diddy comes collapsed in court after the latest developments in the Cassie case. After hearing the news that bail was denied, Combs looked back at his 3 sons who were sitting about 3 rows behind him and patted his chest. When I asked his attorney what Combs said to him after that news, he said, quote, "I'll see you tomorrow." Why? Because they will be back in court tomorrow to fight the bail denial. This afternoon, though, Combs walked into court wearing a black T-shirt and gray sweatpants. He kept his focus mainly on the judge and at times looked at his attorney when he was speaking. The 54-year-old hip-hop mogul was charged with sex trafficking, racketeering, and interstate transportation for prostitution following a month-long Homeland Security investigation. Prosecutors allege that Combs used his business empire to force women to engage in sexual acts with professional sex workers at events he called freak-offs. Coming into the courtroom, the disgraced music mogul Diddy looked a little rougher on the edges compared to how usually has been looking in these court appearances. The mind-blowing claim a man in an orange jumpsuit crumpling in a courtroom turned heads instantly. But while that footage has since been debunked as misleading, the unfolding drama in and around the courtroom remains all too real today as Cassie, formerly known as Cassandra Ventura, steps forward with new receipts. The layers of Diddy's legal and personal unraveling grow even more complex. So what exactly is happening behind those guarded prison walls and court doors? And can these explosive new details reshape a legacy built over decades? We have talked a lot about someone who could be a major witness at a trial, someone who is most likely cooperating with the government, someone whose allegations against Combs, I think it would be fair to say, make up a huge part of the current indictment. I'm talking about Cassandra Ventura, Cassie K's ex-girlfriend, and remember, she sued him back in November of 2023 for sexual assault, battery, sex trafficking. This was among other claims, and that case ultimately started the ball rolling with more lawsuits filed against Combs and ultimately culminated with these criminal charges. In fact, there is an argument to be made that in Combs' indictment for racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking, transportation to engage in prostitution, she's allegedly victim one who was allegedly sex trafficked by force, fraud, or coercion. There is an argument to be made that that is her. Actually, one of her main accusations that we're going to go into is specifically described in this indictment. Again, it seems to me that her claims are what make up the majority of this indictment. Then the suit says, quote, "The truth, however, is that Miss Cassandra Ventura was held down by Mr. Combs and endured over a decade of his violent behavior and disturbed demands for Miss Ventura. The dark times were those she spent trapped by Mr. Combs in a cycle of abuse, violence, and sex. For starters, dismiss the notion that Diddy has been handed a life sentence. No judge has uttered that verdict yet, and no live-streamed moment confirms such a collapse. Instead, Combs finds himself detained at Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center facing serious charges of coercion and abuse that spans several years. DC has historically had tremendous problems, and the problems aren't resolved. CS's lawyers originally hoping he could await trial under house arrest at his mansion, now arguing for him to be moved to a prison in New Jersey in the lead-up to this trial, citing the prison's poor conditions, violence, and deaths. On Wednesday, his lawyer said he was being held in a special housing unit with an extra level of security. The viral video series, originally posted by TikTok user @WadeWilson Cree on November 11th, quickly amassed over 400,000 views. It featured a collage of Images a man in a wheelchair, a sudden collapse, the aura of defeat, yet beyond the digital noise lies a far more unsettling narrative. A once celebrated music executive now struggling under the weight of his own actions. Did he collapse in court because he heard his sentence? I didn't see that video, so there was a huge article, and it pretty much said Diddy heard his sentence and collapsed cause he was in shock. This is a picture of him. Collapse. That's not Diddy, bro. That's not Diddy, man. That does not look like bro. That does not look like him. But did you see his mugshot? It didn't look like that. Didn't look like him either. That's what I'm saying. He was way thinner. It was weirdly shaped. He looked like, the alien from American Dad. It's the gray one. Right a little bit, right a little bit. Yeah, I think his name is Roger this, and __. That's definitely him, bro. Like, his head was weirdly shaped, though it wasn't Diddy, bro. Reports suggest that during the Christmas season, a time that should have been filled with warmth and reunion, Diddy experienced a severe meltdown while confined behind bars, according to one source. The record producer, whose physical appearance has noticeably deteriorated with added gray hairs and a thinner frame, pleaded with prison guards to take him to a hospital for observation. The request was reportedly denied, leaving him alone to battle panic attacks during what many described as a nightmare holiday. Judge Subramanian, he didn't bite on that, and Diddy's bail was denied for the third time, according to a report from the Daily Mail. That's why Diddy had a breakdown. A person close to him apparently said, quote, spending the holidays behind bars was a nightmare for him. If we're to believe all this, Diddy had a meltdown in his cell and begged the guards to take him to the hospital for observation, but they refused. The same friend or person told the Daily Mail, quote, he eventually managed to calm himself down with the meditation technique he's been using while he's been behind bars. It took him a few hours of deep breathing and focusing to get out of the bad space he was in, but he finally managed it, saying the hardest part for items is the food, the food, not the lack of ruies or booze, but the food. He, like his first night of jail, Swedish meatballs, and then they have stuff that sounds good, but the old Metropolitan Detention Center has got to make it vomit-inducing things like tacos or fish. Nobody wants fish in jail, or on an airplane, or in a microwave. It's just so. Yeah, I'm sure he's probably losing a few pounds, and that's his complaint about prison, with his high-powered legal team promising swift bail. The reality that he remains incarcerated in ends iffies the scrutiny. Meanwhile, a court order has even mandated the destruction of his jail cell, notes an unprecedented step that underscores the controversial nature of his detention. The judge overseeing Shawkal's criminal case out in New York, this federal case, has just decided whether or not Combs' rights were violated when there was a sweep by federal authorities at the detention center where Combs is currently being housed. Big issue that we've been focusing on, right? Why? Because the ramifications could be huge if prosecutors, generally speaking, if prosecutors engaged in a form of misconduct that violates a defendant's rights, they might have to be recused from the case. The evidence could be excluded from trial. Maybe if something is really egregious or bad, the case gets dismissed. So I want to go through this order from Judge Arun Subramanian of the Southern District of New York. It's really fascinating. So again, Combs face federal racketeering, sex trafficking, and prostitution charges with a trial scheduled for May. Now this is how the order begins: in connection with the Bureau of Prisons October 28, 2024 to November 1, 2024 sweep of the Metropolitan Detention Center, the MDC. A BOP investigator 1 photographed 19 pages of Combs' notes and sent them to the government's filter team. The filter team consists of a USAS. These are assistant United States attorneys who aren't involved in the investigation or prosecution of this case. The filter team redacted the notes and sent them to the case team. The case team consists of the agents in a USAS investigating and prosecuting Combs. So let me start there. So yes, there was a raid at the MDC, but the plot thickens further with the emergence of Cassie's lawsuit in a dramatic twist that shifts the spotlight from mere courtroom theatrics to deeply personal allegations. Cassie, once romantically linked to Combs, has come forward with accusations that have rattled the music industry. She said from that point forward she was terrified, isolated, and unable to see a pathway out of Mr. Combs' abusive hold on her life. She found herself numb to the that she was experiencing. She began to blindly follow his instructions out of fear of again being on the receiving end of a vicious beating. Ventura described in her suit being forced to pour oil on herself during the freak-offs and being given drugs to keep her engaged in these events, which were also called FOS. Ventura also described several instances of being beaten by Combs in September of 2018 after dating Combs for a decade. Ventura described Combs raping her after she met him for dinner. She said she actually believed they were meeting to discuss ending their relationship, but then she said he forced his way into her home. Her suit said Mr. Combs forced himself into her apartment and tried to kiss Miss Ventura. She told him to stop and attempted to push him away. Mr. Combs then forcibly pulled off Miss Ventura's clothing and unbuckled his belt. Then Ventura claimed Combs read her, and their relationship ended for good last November. She released this statement after filing her civil suit after years in silence and darkness. I am finally ready to tell my story and to speak up on behalf of myself and for the benefit